Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar from Lightcast as we dive into our Skills Revolution series for the UK. I'm very excited. My name's Andy Derman. I lead Lightcast work in the EMEA and APAC region, including, of course, the UK, working in the government and education space. And I'm pleased to be joined by Eleanor McGreeny, our head of global research. Hello, Eleanor.
Hi, Andy. Good to
Thanks.
be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining me. So today we are going to, as I say, dive into another aspect of what we're seeing in the labour market, the UK labour market. But before we get into the good stuff, let me just remind you a little bit, especially if you're new to Lightcast, a little bit about who we are. So we are a labour market intelligence organisation motivated by helping organisations and ultimately the stakeholders they serve to better understand what's happening in the labour market so they can make better decisions as it relates to empowering education, to deliver the right training to meet evolving employer need, through to work we do in the government space, both at regional and national level, to influence policy and local decision making on investment into skills and wider labour market activity, all the way through to the work we do with enterprises and companies around the world to help them think through their workforce planning strategies, understand their specific needs, and identify the talent pools they need to access to meet those needs. We do that through a range of data sets, broadly grouped into three different types of insight. Structural, official statistics that derive from government sources that help us understand really the stock and building blocks of labour markets, through to big data sources that help us understand through job postings, derived data, help us understand employer demand at a level of granularity and currency that you just can't get from official statistics. And similarly, leveraging online and professional profiles, opt-in CV data to help us understand the supply of labour and contextualize what we're seeing in wider labour market trends. And we deliver that to our customers through data, and data is delivered through software platforms, through APIs and data shares, and through our amazing team of economists who undertake research and support customers around specific needs as we go. So that's a little bit about us as Lightcast and why we care about topics like what's happening in the UK labour market and the Skills Revolution series that we've been working through in recent months. You may have already been part of this, and if not, you'll find recordings and we'll point you towards those that reflect on different aspects of what we've seen in the research that Eleanor and colleagues have surfaced, the reports, as much as some deep dives we've done with customers to think about how we leverage this in our day-to-day work and through training. We're on the webinar session where we're going to dig into some of the building blocks to the insights that we've got before we round off in a week or so to bring some key collaborators and voices together to discuss what it means for their part of the labour market agenda. So more on that a little later on. Right. So today's topic. Well, we've read the report. Hopefully, we've heard the summary of that, and we've had the chance to dive into this with customers to help them leverage their access of Lightcast data to localize and interpret more of the information. Today, we're going to dive into a slightly different aspect of the theme that's underpinning this and share some insights behind the how that we've been able to derive the kinds of insights that we've found in and shared in the report, and point you towards some resources that we hope you will find to be of value after this discussion as we go. A quick kind of reminder, and especially for those that may have not dived in yet to the report or been part of the other sessions, as I'm sure all of you recognize in your work serving different aspects of the labour market and economy, we are in a season of rapid change and many drivers and disruptors to that change. We've talked previously a lot about AI and the grain transition and digital more generally. We're seeing major disruptions daily around the world geopolitics and how that influences access to labor, the movement of labor, the localization, as well as sluggish productivity and a lot of the change that we've seen post-COVID, as well as wider demographic changes there. So lots of disruptors influencing our the labor market from different dimensions, and we've brought that together really to look specifically at the UK labor market and think about, well, what are we actually seeing in the UK, and what might this mean given the certainly the policy reform that we're experiencing here in the UK with the change of government and the relentless white papers and new policies that are coming through. And we've dived in this and connected this report very specifically to the Skills England agenda that's recently emerged as well, to really show how data, the data and insights that we provide really should be a factor that can help us execute against this policy landscape. And one of the big things that really jumped out, so a couple of things that really jumped out to us is obviously the need to be data driven, particularly at this fast pace of change. So there's a lot of conjecture. How do we get beneath those headlines and understand what's really driving that change? And so we mapped that skills disruption that we're seeing in our data to some of the key areas in the UK, and some showcases around some of the priority sectors that the Skills England early priorities that they've highlighted as well, just to kind of bring some context and hopefully make some useful insights for further analysis and connection to that point. So the report itself presents the headlines. We've explored those previously, and hopefully you've been able to keep up to speed with that. What we wanted to do with this report was really think a little bit more, as I said earlier, about the how have we got to this, because actually I think one of the great challenges, in particularly when you're looking at pace of change, emergent skills, is you need to know what you're looking for. And that's a great challenge when you're dealing with data sets that have billions of data points. We need to bring structure and order to that in which to derive meaning. And so this session here, and Eleanor's great experience and expertise, is really about lifting the lid on how we're able to actually derive these kinds of insights from our data through the work that we do to build and manage and develop taxonomies that bring structure to our labor market data. And so Eleanor's going to just tell us a little bit about what do we mean by taxonomy. It's a term we hear regularly these days, and we spend a lot of time talking about the wonders of taxonomies and hierarchies and all kinds of data structures. And whilst that's is what we live and breathe, we recognize that not everyone is so exposed. And so we want to take the opportunity to really kind of help you understand what we mean by a taxonomy, and discover a little bit more about the Lightcast taxonomies that are driving this kind of analysis. So I think it's at this point, isn't it, Eleanor? I'm going to pass on to you, and you can start to take us through some of this, and I'll try and pose some questions as we go to kind of dig into the topics that you're mentioning. So over to you.
Thanks, Andy. And I think one of the things that you said struck me in the sense that we have Skills England that is trying to understand what the priorities are, trying to measure the change. But at the end of the day, what we measure is what we can see in the labor market. And if we don't have a structure to measure things, then we are not going to be able to track them over time and be able to find policies that respond to the rapid changes into the labor market. So an expression that I often hear in many different contexts, not just in relation to the labor market, is what gets measured gets done. And in a way, having a taxonomy is something that helps us get into the structure of the labor market so that we can measure it, so that we can respond to the changes. So at the very, very high level, why taxonomies? Well, because they help us actually put a structure around all these many data points that we see about the labor market, and not just any structure, a structure that help us simplify and connect many complex data points that are moving at a very fast pace. So in a nutshell, if there's one thing to take away from today, what are taxonomies? A way to create a structure in a very noisy environment, which is the labor market nowadays.
So on that point, Eleanor, certainly for many people who have dabbled in labour market data, and obviously we have an enlightened audience here, will be familiar with things like the standard occupational classification SOC codes and SIC codes for industries. So are they taxonomies? And if so, why do we need to do more than just what's already available in publicly available data?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Yes, they are taxonomies. Everything that we see that provides structure in the way we classify and make sense of data is a taxonomy. So in the UK context, the ONS standard industry classification, the SIC codes, and the SOC codes, the standard occupational classification, are the key two main taxonomies that are being used to understand and track the labor market. And these are very good in the sense that they give us a structure of the labor market and that help us make sense of what is going on. They're not the only taxonomies that there are out there, however, because if we broaden out the horizon a little bit more and just not stay in the UK, we see that neighboring Europe, they have different taxonomies. They have what they call ISCO taxonomy, which is the equivalent but slightly different taxonomy for occupations than the one that we have in the UK. And similarly, if you look overseas, if you look at the US, they also have a taxonomy. It's called with the same name. It's called SOC. Has a completely different number of occupations in it and a different way to structure the occupations in it. So there are a few taxonomies out there, and each of the different countries is trying to create a taxonomy that works for their culture, their setting, the labor market composition of their own area. And they are good because they help us navigate the labor market, and they make a complex topic easier. So that is the why of the taxonomies. But then if we think about where the taxonomies from official statistics may fall short, well, there are 4 areas that we need to investigate a little bit further. So on one level, let's stay with SOC and SIC for a moment. Let's stay in the UK as we start. These taxonomies are very helpful, but one could argue they're not granular enough to capture what's happening in the labor market right now. And bear with me for a moment. If you spend a lot of time in taxonomies like I do, you would say, wait a second, there's 400 plus occupations in the SOC taxonomy in the UK. That's quite a lot. And that is true. There's a lot of occupations that are also very well structured in the sense that you can look at the labor market at the SOC 1 level, which is only 10 groups of occupation. You can look at the SOC 2, SOC 3, and all the way more granular at the SOC 4. And that's great. And they're starting to build SOC 5 and 6, though they don't report data at that level of granularity, but they're acknowledging that there is that level. The thing is, there are way more occupations in the labor market than just these big categories. And sometimes, especially in a very fast-changing labor market, these big buckets don't actually capture what's happening on the ground. And related to that, I'm going to jump from granular to responsive for a moment. We have these big categories, and we don't know exactly what's bucketed underneath them. And also, these categories are updated only every so often, most of the times every 10 years when it comes to the UK context. And what this means is that we have occupations that emerge in the labor market between one iteration of the taxonomy and the next one, that are hidden somewhere in this taxonomy, and we don't really see them. And in a fast changing labor market like the one we are in right now, we are missing very important data points. And the example that comes to mind is, for example, data scientist. This was a profession that 10 years ago didn't exist. So when there was the SOC 2010 taxonomy, the data scientists were buried into the SOC codes for IT professionals more in general. In the last 10 years, there's a whole business has grown and come up in relation to data scientists and other data engineers and other occupations. And in the 2020 version of the SOC occupation, we now have the data scientist as a separate category. It took 10 years to see this. And sometimes in some of the changes that are happening right now, and we don't have the time to wait for 10 years to see them happening in the labor market. So first challenge, things are not granular enough to separate them out. Second challenge, they're not responsive enough to capture the new changes and they emerge. Then a third challenge related to the taxonomies that I was just mentioning earlier is that each country has their own. So I'm going to the global point on this slide here. That makes sense in a sense because each country is made in a different way. They have different strengths in the labor market. They care more about some sector rather than others. And so each taxonomy is built to make sense of that specific labor market. But the moment in which a country is, for whatever reason, interested in understanding what's going on beyond their border, these taxonomies fail short to help us navigate and translate the labor market from one country to the other, because each has their own and is slightly different and therefore not very comparable. And so one of the things that's missing is that comparability between one another. And so putting together the granular, global, and responsive point, one of the things that we're doing at Lightcast is we've developed a number of taxonomies that can help us go beyond and provide more granular insight that are applicable everywhere in the world and are responsive in the sense that we update them fairly frequently. Now, before I move on, I want to touch on specific on this slide. And specific is the opposite side of granular. So you can have a taxonomy that's not granular enough, but you can also have the opposite problem. You can have something that is too specific, that is almost useless in terms of provided information. And that's, for example, when you try to think about companies' titles. So you can have the same job title in two different organizations, and it could mean something completely different. Or you can have the same role that is called in ever so slightly different ways in different places. And if you go at that very specific level, then you also can't make sense of the labor market. So you want to strike the right balance in between something that is very granular, but not too specific. And so these are kind of like the four foundations behind the taxonomies that we've introduced at Lightcast.
So thinking, Eleanor, about the research hypothesis that we came into with the Skills Revolution work and its connection to the Skills England policy development is, of course, that policy development is posing the question: well, what's happening in the world of skills demand, and how do we create a skill system that is fit for purpose? And so a default position could be to jump into data about using standard occupational classification, so SOC codes. That will give us a sense of what roles at a relatively high level are in demand and how they might be trending, but doesn't actually answer the specific question that what skills are being sought and how do they vary across different segments of the economy. So we can see the volume, but not necessarily the nature of that demand. And we don't have a skills taxonomy in the UK. So that's a hole, right? And then to your point about the responsive, well, the point here of the fast pace of change that's affecting our labor market means we need to be looking as much at the emergent things and not waiting 10 years for them to suddenly come through and become a real role, because data science, as we've seen and charted many a time, or AI or other emergent technologies, don't start as a set of industries or occupations. They start as a set of skills that find their way and cluster into certain roles, but then find their way more ubiquitously in the case of the greenification of the standard labor market, the general ubiquitous leveraging of AI skills now right across the labor market, as we've looked at. So again, we need something that's responsive. And the global dimension is ever more important in an interconnected world. We talked about some of those disruptions are global disruptions. Some of our challenges are global competition for labor in an ever more digitally connected world. Place has a different role to play. And so I think this just reinforces the why do we do what we do. We'll talk on a little bit more now about the how, but really helpful to understand that there are things out there, they're great, but they serve certain purposes, and we have built a business globally around the fact that they don't quite go far enough. And so you're now going to talk to us a little bit more about, well, how far can we go and where are we going with all of this to solve some of those limitations?
Yeah, and I think that's the point. We have many different data sets, and we have official taxonomies that get us to some point in understanding these data sets. But with the pace of change increasingly becoming faster and faster, that ever so much is not enough anymore. We need to do a little bit more if we are to truly understand what's going on. And that is the idea behind why we built 3 different taxonomies. One on occupations, one on job titles, and then the one that is probably the most relevant here is the one around skills, because that is the missing point. So if occupation and job titles give us more detail to something that is already available in official statistics, Lightcast skills taxonomy actually fills a gap in the sense that we don't have anything at all in that space. And so, we're going to talk about each of them in the detail in a moment. But the idea is that we built and we are trying to connect all the different data sets that we have available on the labor market, because that's part of our mission. We want to bring together all the different data sets available on the labor market to help them make sense and unlock new opportunities in the labor market. But to do so, we can't just have a catalog of information that are completely disjointed from one another. We need to bring them all together and make them speak the same language. And these taxonomies allow us to do precisely that, to make all the different data sets, the core official statistics, the job postings data, profiles data, all come together and speak one global universal language that applies across the world. So that's the overview of what we are trying to do. And then a little bit more details on the specifics. I'm going to start with the occupation taxonomy. The Lightcast occupation taxonomy is a way to classify occupation into 4 hierarchical structures that goes from the broader career areas all the way to specific specialized occupations. So the structure we're talking about is not too dissimilar to what you see in an official statistics. You go from the more general to the more specific roles. But the difference here is in the numbers. As you can see, we're talking about 27 career areas, 180 plus occupation groups, 780 plus occupation, and then 1900 specialized occupation. And that 1900 plus specialized occupation is the thing that I really want to put attention here, because that's the level of granularity that we are not seeing in the official statistics like SOC. So actually, we don't even see that level of granularity of the occupation level. To put things in perspective, there are around 450 occupations in the latest SOC 2020 taxonomy. And so even just the occupation layer in this taxonomy has twice as many occupation. And if you want to go to the very specific level of specialized occupation, you're almost getting to 2,000 different roles. So that gets very specific. And just to give you an idea, this is what it looks like in practice. So you can pick a career area like information technology, and then dive deep into different type of occupations group within that area. say you pick software development, then you can look into all the specific type of developers, software, mobile application, web developers. And then even within that level, you can go to the specifics of the different specific occupation, which we call specialized occupation. So you can type, in the case of the mobile application developer, depending on the system, whether it is iOS or Android developers, you have different roles. This matters is not just about having a more granular view of the labor market, but when you try to understand the skills needs of different roles, you actually need this level of granularity. Because when you look at the high level picture, you start missing the details of what one type of developer needs compared to the other one. And so if we're really interested in the skills, then we need to become more specific about the type of roles. And the other good thing about this taxonomy, like all the Lightcast taxonomies, is that it is regularly updated. And so we are able to capture new occupation much more frequently than in official statistics updates. And for example, in a few weeks, we are going to have an update to what we call the version 7 of this taxonomy. And it will include for the first time a number of occupations related to artificial intelligence, which is something that we're not seeing in any other taxonomy. And so that again can help understand the labor market a little bit better. Then the other side of the Lightcast taxonomy, the second one is the job titles taxonomy, which I call it the other side of the occupation taxonomy because it's kind of like related but slightly different. And here is the goal behind this taxonomy is to classify job titles in a way that is normalized regardless of the employers that uses them. Because as I said before, each company calls different roles in different ways. Even in small ways, you can have a role that says, like a mobile developer, Android in brackets, or you could have a slash afterwards, or you could not explain it, but say it in the job ad. And so all this kind of information creates confusion, and then you can't compare what your company is doing compared to what another company is doing. And so what we do is we try to strip out all these differences and create one Lightcast title that applies to many of the workforce titles that companies are using. And here there's many titles. There's 70,000, I think, plus job titles in our taxonomy. And that I think is a reflection of the confusion that's available in the labor market at the moment with each employer having their own slightly specific titles. This helps avoid this confusion.
I think that's a really important point. There's an interesting part of the story, I think, over the years of how we've started to build this granularity is historically a good chunk of our focus was in the education and government and the labour market research realm. But over recent years, ever more we've connected into the workforce planning and the enterprise space, where there was, and we identified a major disconnect between how we generally as labour market researchers see the labour market, i.e. the sort of more standard taxonomies, and the real world of the day-to-day jobs that people did. And this is a great example of how we've not only added granularity into the occupation taxonomy, but gone a level deeper into titles. And even at 70,000 odd, and this is an example, that's still an aggregation of the real world. And so, I think the great challenge is how do you make everything fit together? And we haven't even talked about skills yet, which we'll come on to. How do you get those things fitting together so that depending on the angle you're coming at the question from, you can start from your point of specificity and understand how it fits up? Or the other way around, if you're doing your general research, how that might break down into real world activity. And I think this example is just a perfect example of how those two worlds come together.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the slides even in more details, like I think it captured it really well, because all the 8 job titles that we got here, the workforce titles, they're all very realistic. Like these are things that we do find when you look for on a job board for job postings. In reality, is they all mean the same business data analyst type of role, but because companies talk about it in many different ways, it can get very confusing. And so that's where bringing it all together can help. But Andy, as you said, we have not yet mentioned the main taxonomy that was probably worth mentioning here, which is the Lightcast skills taxonomy, which is a huge, I would say huge taxonomy, because it includes over 32,000 different skills. I want to spend 1 second to say, because this is a comment I get all the time when I work with customers. Yes, but there's not just skills, there's also knowledge and abilities and competencies. Yes, that's true. We couldn't call it the Lightcast skills, knowledge, ability, competencies taxonomies. So it's called the skills taxonomy, but we do include in the taxonomy all the knowledge, abilities, competencies that are required by employers when they're looking for new talent to join their companies. And so the way this taxonomy is organized, it's in a way similar to the occupation taxonomy, in the sense that we have a hierarchical organization where we start from a broader level of skills categories, which give us a thematic idea of the type of skills that are being required. An example could be engineering, healthcare, or it could be research, communication, business. So very high level overview of the type of skills. Within each of these 32 skills categories, we then have skills subcategories, which can also be referred to as skills clusters. And we have approximately 400 of them. And they give us a level of specificity that is more detailed than the categories, but is still high level enough. And so when it comes to engineering, it means that we have skills such as software for engineering or industrial engineering versus mechanical engineering and many of the other fields within the tech. From there, each of these subcategories breaks down into specific skills. And again, when I say specific skills, I mean specific skills, knowledge, abilities, software that are related to that specific area. And so if we continue with the example of engineering, specific skills included within that category are, for example, AutoCAD, so that's a software skill, or fixture design, or many other specific skills related to engineering. And when we get to this specific skills level, then the skills that we have there, we also group them into 3 different categories. Shouldn't call categories because we got the skills categories there and it gets confusing. In 3 groups. They can be flagged as common skills, specialized skill, or software skills. What's the difference between them? The common skills are sometimes also referred to as human skills or soft skills. And there are a lot of those skills that we see in many, many jobs across the labor market. So they're kind of like transversal foundational skills. Could be communication, leadership, critical thinking. Those are common skills. Then we have specialized skills, and these are technical skills that normally refer to a specific occupation or a specific group of occupations or industries. So, for example, in terms of specialized skills, you'll have things like social media or knowledge of social medias or digital marketing or things like that. And then instead you have software skills, which are the specific tools, software tools behind the job. So Python programming language or Amazon Web Services. Those are specific software skills. And then I think on the next slide, we got, yes, here you got your real case study in terms of how it works out in practice. So a skill category could be business. And within business, we have a whole bunch of different clusters, subcategories. So you could have business strategy, operations, internal controls, and then you have the specific skills within those subcategories. In this case, if you follow the operations one, you have the more general terms operations, which is a common skills. And then you have the more specialized skills that refer to things such as forecasting management or the specific softwares related to business operations.
Super, thank you. So that was our whistle stop tour, wasn't it, Eleanor? Of certainly what are taxonomies and why are they there? And it's such a lovely word, isn't it, taxonomy? And a little bit about why we do what we do to bring structure into our data and think about those three components. And I hope what's coming through here is an understanding of the value of each of them individually to answer specific questions, but actually the power of then connecting them up together to think about the relationship between different aspects and dynamics of the labor market to help us really build out a more holistic view.
Yeah, and actually on that point, I think we have a couple of slides showcasing how this works in practice when you actually bring them together. So we talk, if you followed these webinars for a while, you know that we talk a lot about AI and the impact of AI in the labor market. And you also know that AI was one of the trends that affected much of the change in the skills velocity report that we're talking about here. And thank you to these taxonomies, we are able to actually try and track these changes and how they're playing out in the labor market. So what you see here is, for example, the demand for specific generative AI related skills in a number of occupations. And here for occupations, we use the Lightcast occupation taxonomy to identify the specific roles. So things like researchers, sales, but also search engine optimization specialist, which is not something that you find in a SOC taxonomy. And then to look at the skills, we use the Leica skills taxonomy, which includes skills such as ChatGPT or generative AI and large language modeling. And here, especially when it comes to AI, we see that year on year, the list of AI skills in our taxonomy is getting longer and longer, the more the field is developing and impacting the labor market. And so one thing that we can do is measure the prevalence of different skills in different occupations thanks to these taxonomies. But then the other thing that we can also do here is we can connect different occupations. Because we break down the DNA of jobs into the specific skills related to them, we can then see and compare the type of skill set that you have in a role to another one. And you can understand the similarities between the two different profiles and the gaps between one and the other. And by identifying these gaps, you can help identify the areas of training that may be needed to help shift people from one job to the other. And here we have the example of electrical engineers to solar engineers, with solar engineer being one of the occupations of the future in terms of increased demand. And this helps showcase what the transition path could be for somebody that has the skills of an electrical engineer to become a solar engineer. And I think, yeah, that's where I ended back to you, Andy, of like putting it all together.
Yeah, no, thank you. Some really good examples, and taxonomies are a innately complex and challenging thing, which is why we have brilliant minds, hundreds of them across our business, building that. And actually, the exciting thing, particularly as it relates to the skills taxonomy, is we have not just our own hundreds of minds across our own business, but we have a community of users who are constantly recommending and requesting skills that they may not see in our data set, and pose the question, what should we be looking for them? And so the joy of being part of an open community, the open skills community that we have, is that we are crowdsourcing intelligence that we're then looking for back in the data. And we don't always put everything in that comes through. We want to keep the the library as manageable as possible, but it's a great way of making sure we're at the cutting edge, and the thousands of customers around the world we have help us keep there collectively and collaboratively. So that's encouraging, and that allows us to update the skills taxonomy on a very regular basis, typically around monthly. We're seeing changes that we're evolving there, so that really is keeping pace with what we're seeing in the labor market. But let's bring this back now that we've understood a few of the examples, and hopefully it's really contextualized how we get to the sorts of insights that we have. Let's think about some of the challenges that we often hear and we speak about around how do we really modernize our skills system. And it's obviously at the heart of the skills reform that we're working through, and the great challenge often that is leveled to educators is how do we keep pace in education terms to how the labor market is moving. So I think Eleanor has beautifully articulated the mechanisms by which we can continue to understand those changes, and of course to be able to adapt and be ready, you first must need to understand it. Let's measure what we see, and use that to influence policy. And so we absolutely believe we are uniquely placed globally, but here in the UK, to be able to serve this case. And particularly one of the call outs in the Skills England report was a need for a world-leading skills taxonomy, a local skills taxonomy. Well, the great news is, you as customers are already using such a thing. And so we would challenge, and we continue to challenge, to say, well, there's one there already ready to use, and we're ready to serve on that one. And particularly serve in a way that connects back into originally or already established official taxonomies, which connect a lot of government data together, and is the best and only way to do so, with the ability to dig deeper and to continue to remain current in a system that, as you described, often can't move quite at the same pace for the sheer cost and effort involved in building these very comprehensive, structured taxonomies that we're used to. And I think, as we've talked about throughout, one of the great challenges is not just looking inwards here in the UK, but thinking about our place in the world and what we can learn from the world. Often, particularly when we're working in countries where data is less prevalent, actually the value of looking to what's happening across the US economy, what's happening across the European economy, can be just as valuable as trying to look inwards, in terms of looking for those signals, thinking about those specialisms that we might want to pick up on. And that's one of the kind of unique positions we find ourselves in. So it's a real honor already to be powering the modernization of the skills system through the work we do across the education and government systems. But we're hopeful that we can continue to serve and support to a greater extent, and hence why we want to showcase these capabilities. And the Skills Revolution report, if you haven't found it and downloaded it just yet, highly recommend it, because it's a great way of seeing some of this in action. There's a link on the slide, but we'll also make sure it's in the follow-up materials for you. Go ahead, download that report, take a look. I hope you can take plenty away from it. And if you haven't read it already, you can read it with this wonderful world of taxonomies in mind, in terms of how we're able to take very complex data points and turn them into meaningful and actionable insights. And on that point, we have a whole wealth of resources that actually allow you to interact and dig into those taxonomies that Ellen has given us a good overview on. So there's a lot of resources there that explain and help us understand them more specifically, and allows you to interact with them. We've got lots of different little widgets and tools that mean you can search and explore those taxonomies to get your hands around and get a sense of how it works for the aspect of the labour market that you care most about. So I'd encourage you to check those resources out. And as Eleanor mentioned, we have one of those updates coming very, very soon. In fact, for some customers, you already have, whether you realize it or not, you already have access to the latest version of the Lightcast occupation taxonomy, the LOT version 7, which is now available through to our API and Snowflake customers, and will be coming through to our software customers through in the next month or so, and you will see that in your analyst system if you're analyst users, and we will communicate and educate around that more specifically going forward. So do keep an eye out for that. We'll obviously explain a little bit about what's changed, and why version 7 is even better than version 6 was. So keep an eye out for that, and I'm sure Ellen and I will bore you to tears at some point in the future on that very topic. So check that out. Also, Elena mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, that we do have a collaborator, what we're calling a collaborator group, coming up um, in a week's time or so, and this is a chance for us to round off this topic of the skills revolution with some incredibly knowledgeable folks that we're honored to be joining us. We're still finalizing exact details, but their emails should be coming out shortly, where we will be inviting people from different aspects of labor market engagement and different communities in the skills world, in the employment world, policy world, to really think about what we've learned through this process and this research, and how they see that fitting into their area of expertise. So, Eleanor, excited for you to join me for that one, and for us to be joined by some esteemed panelists, where we will be able to kind of talk a little bit more about some of these specifics and what it means in different parts of the user community that we engage with. So thank you very much. Thank you, Eleanor. It was a pleasure working with you on this, and the research has been incredibly well received, and a great opportunity to kind of showcase just the why behind what we're doing, as well as the how today of how we get there. So thank you everyone for joining us for today. I hope you leave a little bit wiser. So that next party you go to, and you're struggling for that topic, taxonomies is the one to dive into, and you can look like the smartest person in the room, unless of course you happen to be talking to another Lightcast customer, in which they'll call your bluff and start asking more specific questions. But thank you very much everyone for joining us today. Please do check out those resources. Please do reach out to us, your account manager, Helena, or ourselves, myself. You can find us in various places, not least LinkedIn. Delighted to answer any questions you have. Obviously, if they're hard questions, please point those towards Eleanor as we go forward. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Eleanor, for your contribution today.
Thank you, Andy, for hosting.
Cheers, guys. Bye.